The win on homecoming over Baylor proves that Cincinnati is the best team in the Big 12.
You are Locked On Bearcats, your daily podcast on the Cincinnati Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into a post-game Locked On Bearcats show. My name is Jeff Carr. I am a lifelong Cincinnatter. I love Cincinnati all through and through. I am a season ticket holder for the football team for UC for multiple seasons now, and I've worked in multiple athletic departments in the media relations area. I'm glad that you're alongside me here today because Locked On Bearcats is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and we are your team, your Bearcats, every single day. And on this podcast, we're going to tell you why UC made the biggest statement it's made all year in their homecoming victory over Baylor. There's multiple reasons that feed in to why I believe that the Bearcats, I'm officially saying it, the Bearcats are the best team in the Big 12 because it feels like nobody else is listening. And they've got to hear it at this point. The performance that we saw on Saturday absolutely just it has to force somebody to realize that the Bearcats are here based on how their offense performed, based on the fact that their defense did just enough to get them where they needed to be. And despite this one key deficiency that we'll get to later on in the show, I still find them to be better than anybody else in the Big 12. That's all coming up on today's podcast that is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we said every detail, because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. And I'm telling you what, I don't, if the Bearcats performance didn't move you on Saturday, I don't know what's going on with you. I don't know if you just hate the Bearcats, if you want to be a hater, if you're a Texas Tech fan that doesn't want to look in the rearview mirror, because if you do, objects are closer than they appear because they've passed you. The Bearcats are the best team in the Big 12 because of how they beat Baylor. We came into this week saying, all right, Brendan Sorsby has to outdo Sawyer Robinson. And guess what happened? Not that. The Bearcats came in with this uber conservative game plan. We're going to control the clock. We're going to run the ball down their throats, and they're not going to be able to stop it. And they succeeded. This was a totally different game plan than what beat Kansas. This is a totally different game plan than what beat Iowa State. This is a game plan that no other team in the Big 12 was ready for, because they come in and they say, oh, we're making sure Brendan Sorsby doesn't beat us with his arm. And instead, he beat Baylor with his legs. He was the leading rusher in this game, in a game that the Bearcats as a team ran for 265 yards. Brendan Sorsby paced all runners with 85 yards. Now, he was only 1 yard ahead of Tawee Walker, who had 19 carries to Sorsby's 11. But between Tawee Walker and Evan Pryor, they both rushed for 150 yards together. Evan Pryor had 66. Tawee Walker had 84. And my crude math says that's 150 yards between the two of them. But then you add in Brendan Sorsby and the play that sealed everything for me. I mean, the fumble on the kickoff that Jaquan Sanks was able to grab, that was huge. But the 23-yard rushing touchdown from Brendan Sorsby was the key, because this was on a drive that the Bearcats were able to put together a nice long sustained drive. They had a couple of these on the day, but a nice long sustained drive. And it was like, okay, how are they going to punch this in? It feels like they've got to have a touchdown. Baylor was trying to get close enough to really put a ton of pressure on this Bearcats team. The third quarter, that's something we'll talk about here in a little bit, was a bugaboo again for the Bearcats, but they were able to make up for it in the fourth quarter with this long sustained drive. And then this one play where before the snap, Baylor was all out of sorts. Their defense, they needed to call a timeout, but they had to wait and they had to save that timeout because they're like, well, it's getting down to the end of the ball game, all this other stuff. But they needed to call a timeout because over on the far side, you had an uncovered Bearcats receiver. And so the Baylor defense slides over to make sure, because there were trips on the right side of Brendan Sorsby, trip receivers, And so they made sure to cover all three of those receivers. But by doing so, they opened up a hole on the left side, something that Brendan Sorsby saw. Brendan Sorsby was not going to force a throw to the right side as much as we saw before the snap, because I sat close to that part of the sideline. I'm like, oh man, he might have a throw here. He instead ran this read option that he kept, and he ran over to the left side. He had one guy to beat who was the safety, beat him easily, and he waltzed into the end zone for what was the ceiling touchdown. Even if they hadn't forced the fumble on the ensuing kickoff to Baylor, I still don't think Baylor comes back after that touchdown. That was such a key moment. And there were people that were starting to leave. They're like, we want to beat traffic and all this other stuff. Whatever. And maybe they were there for a long day for homecoming. I get it. That's fine. I stayed. I don't leave early. But if you do, I'm not going to begrudge you. But that was kind of the point that everybody's like, all right, we're safe to go home now. I mean, because of Brendan Sorsby and how he beat Baylor with his legs. He didn't beat him with their arm. I mean, he had a couple of touchdowns passing, but he only had 111 yards. He didn't even have 20 attempts in this game. This was a very conservative game plan from Scott Satterfield. We talked about this on Thursday with Russ Heltman, where I was like, what about if you run the ball more in this game? Because it seemed like both teams were set up for some sort of shootout. And it was like, yes, it seems like the Bearcats have the key advantage and they're going to be able to beat Baylor's defense. But I almost wonder if Scott Satterfield just sat there and thought, like, look, yeah, sure, we could win a shootout, but why force that? Why make that part of this? Let's just hold on to the ball. Now, later on in the game, as we got into the end of the second quarter and as we get into the third quarter, Baylor started to do the same thing, and they started to be successful with it. They were able to make key passes at moments where they got plenty of first downs and keeping drives alive. And for a moment, you almost got back to even with the time of possession. But by the time the game ended, UC won that battle. 35 minutes and 6 seconds of time of possession compared to 24 minutes and 54 seconds. It wasn't a dominant time of possession thing because, honestly, for the second week in a row, the biggest margin in this game came from turnovers, which we'll get to here in just a minute. But the way that the offense was run and the way that the offense featured the run, you just weren't going to see Baylor come back in this game, because they couldn't stop, no matter what it was. Brendan Sorsby had a great day rushing, like I mentioned, but so did Tawee Walker. Tawee Walker had another play, and I don't think it went as viral as the one where he just bodied the guy from Iowa State, but he got another one. Number 17, Tyler Turner. Sounds like Timmy Turner from Fairly Odd Parents, but Tyler Turner from Baylor tries to tackle him low, tries to come in a little bit toward his feet and try to grab his ankles or something. And as he does, Tawee Walker just bodies him into the ground and keeps on going. Because if you try to tackle Tawee Walker, you best come with what you've got that is absolutely your strength. And if you don't, just get out of his way, because you are going to get destroyed. I love watching Tawee Walker run. It looks like he is running absolutely mad, because even when he got hit, there were a couple of times that he would get hit at the line of scrimmage or maybe even behind the line of scrimmage, but he has this second effort in him that he pushes the pile forward 1, 2, 3 yards. And I know that's not a ton. That's not like game breaking or anything like that. But those types of plays are what's going to win you ball games down the road when you're really facing the tough ones, like, next week against Utah, and then they've got a couple of weeks against BYU, and then you finish up the season against TCU. Like, those games, you're going to need those types of plays, those extra details that we see guys give. And Tawee Walker's an extra details guy. He's the kind of guy that can change a game with his details. But it was all about the running in this game. And I was slightly surprised, but not shocked, because earlier on in the week, I just thought, man, time of possession could be a big factor in this game, as much as it hasn't been in weeks past, because the Bearcats can just score at will with these explosive plays. They weren't getting the explosive plays against Baylor, but they were getting the long, sustained drives that Baylor just ultimately could not stop at any point. There was never a point where I was just like, yeah, this feels like this Bearcats offense has to figure something out. I was like, no, they're good. They got this. Just run the ball down the throats and keep on trucking toward that homecoming win. Huge win. And I'm telling you, because of how they played and the fact that it was a totally different game plan, it shows me why they are the best team in the Big 12. There's another reason why I think they're the best team in the Big 12, and it has to do with their defense. Shocker, right? Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. And I'm giving this week's Moving the Game Forward performance to Jaquan Sanks on the kickoff return, that he was able to punch the ball out from the returner's arms and was able to fall on it. That was a beautiful play that really sealed the deal. I mean, that was the play that really felt like it just killed any momentum that the Baylor Bears possibly could have had, and it sealed the win for the Bearcats over Baylor on homecoming. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. I thank you for making Locked On Bearcats part of your day. If it's not part of your everyday routine, please consider making it by subscribing right here on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app, because we are free and available on all platforms. And we're with you all throughout the football season, all into the basketball season, and everywhere in between, covering UC athletics for Locked On, or for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. I'm so impressed with what this defense was able to do. And I had mentioned in my post-game video that it wasn't their best day. I mean, there were definitely a lot of plays that they made, but there were a lot of reasons that they kept Baylor in this game. I mean, at one point, the Bearcats were up 24-0. So the fact that at one point the Bearcats were only up by one score, there's a couple of reasons for that. The offensive conservative game plan sort of let them back in it a little bit, but the defense just broke a couple of times. The bend but don't break defense broke. And when you bend and you break, you just ain't good. And they had some drives that weren't very good during this game, especially centered around halftime. They keep doing this thing where it's like before and after halftime, they try to shoot themselves in the foot a little bit. And they were able to sustain themselves and get this win because of a couple of key plays. The reason that I find that the Bearcats are the best team in the Big 12 is because they make the plays when they need them. If you have a moment where it's like, boy, you could really use a turnover right here. Boom, we got turnovers. 2 different fumble recoveries in this game. Huge moments that really pushed the Bearcats into the win column. There were also some sacks. I mean, we had 2 total team sacks, and 3 tackles for losses. It's not amazing, right? We're not going crazy over it, but they were key moments where they were able to shut down Sawyer Robinson. There was a couple of 3 and outs that the Baylor offense had, and Baylor came into this game averaging over 30 points a game, and of course get shut down to 20 points a game, to the point that if you did take the total over under 67.5, you missed that because they hit the under because of how the Bearcats were able to limit the Baylor Bears. But the key plays that they were able to come up with in key moments, like the fumble that they forced on Cameron early on in the ball game, that Logan Wilson was able to punch out the ball. And it's funny because that was that moment. Like, there's times where defenders miss tackles and you're like, oh my gosh, stop trying to punch out the ball and just tackle the guy. Logan Wilson showed you why. When you try to punch out the ball, sometimes good things happen. That was a nice play. And they were able to get the fumble and then go down and score very easily. But the whole point of this is, like, this is now 2 weeks in a row, and we could say what we want about Oklahoma State, but Baylor has a much better offense and much better playmakers. And the Bearcats were still able to come up with some key takeaways and key moments. There were a few actually that they dropped interceptions. I can remember at least 2 occasions where it seemed as though the ball was in the hands of a defensive back and they just could not hold on to it. But I loved what I saw in key moments from this team. Now, I know the kickoff was, more special teams than it was defense, but at the same time, like that's where this team really is starting to come into its own defensively. Because we talked about it, early on in the season where it was the bend but don't break stuff. And that's kind of hard to watch sometimes when you're not getting pressure on the quarterback and when you're not forcing interceptions and all of that great stuff. It's just, hundreds of yards to the opponent. And then whenever they get into the red zone, you shut them down. But man, it feels like you've got to find that next level. I think the Bearcats have found that next level. The key takeaways and key moments, that is what is going to win them games at Utah. That is what is going to win them games at home against BYU, because you just saw what BYU did to Iowa State. Iowa State was up by multiple scores. BYU turns it around and they win by multiple scores because they're a good team. But you beat good teams by taking those key moments and not missing. And that's 2 weeks in a row now that we've seen the Bearcats not miss. I don't expect them to all of a sudden just stop getting turnovers and all of a sudden stop making plays on offense and all of this thing. Like, everybody has a bad day, but I feel like there's enough good talent on this team that if somebody has a bad day, there's another guy waiting to step up and say, I got you. That's how this goes, right? The whole next man up mentality, all of this other stuff. That's what the Bearcats can do with the talent that Scott Satterfield has put on this field. And I think now more than ever, like seeing everything all together with the offense, that do you need a lot of passing yards? Gotcha. Do you need a lot of rushing yards? Gotcha. Do you need explosive plays in explosive moments? Gotcha. And now add in, do you need a key takeaway? Gotcha. They're not going to be a perfect defense. And quite frankly, there's going to be that thing where they match up against somebody like BYU. And everybody's going to look at the EPA per play, and they're going to look at all the defensive statistics, and they're going to say, BYU is just going to dog walk this Cincinnati defense. But they don't see the timely plays. They don't see the turnovers that get forced. I got faith. This team's going to go far. It's going to win the Big 12 championship. I'm calling it right here. I believe that the Cincinnati Bearcats will be your Big 12 champion. I did not think I'd be saying this. I definitely didn't think at any point this season they'd be 7-1 and be ranked and be moving up the rankings and all this other stuff. Certainly didn't think we'd be talking about them as a Big 12 favorite. But because of everything they've put together, I have confidence and hope put together that Scott Satterfield, Brendan Sorsby and company can get this team all the way through to the end and get that automatic playoff bid because you're the Big 12 conference champion. You go win that game in Dallas. They're so much fun to watch right now. And we're starting to see some guys break out a little bit. I thought Michael Coleman had a good game. Now his, stat sheet's not filling up or nothing, but he had 4 tackles. He had a half sack and a half tackle for the loss. He was getting a lot of pressure in the backfield. Liked what I saw from Jalen Hunt as well. We're starting to see those other guys, and Dante Corleone was on the field a little bit more in this game. So I think that's why we did. Like Chad Brindle said that early on in the week, the defensive line is going to get more pressure the more that Dante Corleone is able to play. And he had that moment early on in the first quarter where he kind of got up a little bit and hobbled on the ankle on his right leg, at least. And you kind of wondered if that was just sending him right back into the injury tent and if he was going to be missing the rest of this game. He was back out like 2 drives later. And he did some good stuff. I mean, he didn't like go crazy on the stat sheet either. Just had 2 assisted tackles in the game. But I've very much seen some growth on that defensive line, and I've seen the growth in the key plays. And when you make key plays, you're a championship ball club. And I really think that's where the Bearcats are. And I think that if you really look at it, if you really think about the Bearcats, you see it too. Now, the interesting part, the part that you're probably wondering about because you've seen it the last few weeks like I have, there seems to be a moment in the game where the foot comes off the throttle a little bit and the other team tries to catch up and they get closer than you like. It's all about that third quarter. I'm going to tell you exactly why next. We are firmly in the clutches of the weekend, and it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For the Bearcats this week, I'm looking at Brendan Sorsby, and it was more with his legs than it was with his arm that he delivered. He led the team in rushing with 85 yards, and of course, the 23-yard rushing touchdown that really felt like was the nail in the coffin that led to this Bearcats win over Baylor. And just like Brendan Sorsby delivered for the Bearcats, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash streaks. You save every Saturday that you order. You can stack it all up in a season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday and keep that streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, the place where the Bearcats just can't seem to get no respect. I mean, they did move into third as far as favorites to win the Big 12 championship, but FanDuel still loves Texas Tech. In fact, Texas Tech is favored at minus 135 to win the Big 12 Conference Championship game, according to FanDuel. BYU is second at plus 470, and then Cincinnati is 6-1 odds to win the Big 12 Championship game. I think it's just really just going to take beating BYU, and then Texas Tech is still going to be favored to win the Conference Championship game. So the Bearcats are just going to have to go do it. They ain't going to be favored at any point this season. I firmly believe that after the performances they put on the field, they should be. Alas, here we are. Head on over to FanDuel right now. New users can place a $5 wager, and if it wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Download FanDuel today. You can continue the conversation with me after the show. You follow me on Twitter at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs, and you can also follow the show at LO_Bearcats. That's on Twitter as well. I'm also on TikTok at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs, and you can follow Locked On Bearcats over there as well at Locked On Bearcats, all one word. All right, so there's a concern, obviously. I mean, when you're talking about the best team in the Big 12, you're thinking, all right, there's no worries whatsoever. There's one worry, and it's the third quarter. All total on the season, including this Baylor win that they just got here, the Bearcats are doubling their opponents. Now, part of that's the fact that they beat Northwestern State 70-0. That's going to help your point differential. Don't care who you are. But they have scored 306 points and they have allowed 152. What is fascinating is that they are dominating the first half. Absolutely dominating. 200 points scored to 63 points allowed. Dominating it. And then you get into the third quarter where the Bearcats have a negative point differential. Bearcats have scored 37 points in the third quarter. Their opponents have scored 41. Now, I'm not saying that this one thing is going to doom everything that I've just told you and why I believe that the Bearcats are the best team in the Big 12, but it's something to keep an eye on. Because through the rest of the 3 quarters in the game, they are absolutely destroying people. A ridiculous margin of victory, or a ridiculous point differential when you're looking at the first, second, and fourth quarters. But for some reason in the third quarter, they come out of halftime flat or they change their game plan at halftime. I don't really believe that part, but there's something that happens after halftime that it takes them 15 minutes to figure out, 15 minutes of game time to figure out. Because then when they get into the fourth quarter, everything's back to good. But for some reason, I mean, in the third quarter against Baylor, Baylor brings it to 27-20. And you are starting to think, I felt a little bit of doubts at that point. I'm like, what are we looking at here? Like, is this really this big of a concern? Because it felt like the Bearcats had dominated Baylor. And then they gave up a score right before halftime, and then they gave up a score right after halftime. And then they give up another score. And it was just like, okay, what's going on here? I need to see exactly what happens in the third quarter. It almost feels as though the game plan gets too conservative on both sides of the ball. The defense kind of gets pushed back a little bit. The offense really focuses a lot more on short, high percentage plays. And the opposing defenses really seem to key in on that and just shut them down. And so I need to see this third quarter next week against Utah and what's going to happen in it. Because if they can keep doing this thing where they get up so early, I mean, right now, just looking at the first quarter by itself, the Bearcats are outscoring their opponents 97-10. I mean, what? It's been multiple weeks. 2. Sorry. Had half of a thought and half another thought. Let me put the thought together here. Out of 8 weeks of football, the Bearcats have allowed their opponent to score twice in the first quarter. That's it. Kansas got 7 points on them, and UCF got a field goal on them. That's it. They're destroying people in the first quarter. Nebraska didn't score on them in the first quarter. Iowa State didn't score on them in the first quarter. Sorry, Oklahoma State scored on them in the first quarter, not UCF. Got my notes mixed up there. So they've only done that on the road. At home, they've allowed 0 points to their opponents in the first quarter. They just do this thing where they get up so quickly. Can you keep your foot on the gas a little bit in the third quarter? It feels like we're having a little bit more stress in the fourth quarters than we should. And then by the end of the game, we look at the final score and we're like, why were we ever stressed at any point in this game? And so maybe that's on us. Maybe we just need to be a little bit more zen through the third quarter. But at the same time, I'm still thinking like, okay, do not let the opponent get up on you like they do in the third quarter. The fact that the Bearcats are outscored in that quarter and yet they still double up their opponents in total point differential is mind-boggling. But I still believe that with all of this, looking at this big picture, and I know I saw our friend Drake Toll over on Lockdown Big 12 send out about 150,000 tweets on Saturday talking about how good BYU is. All credit to them. They had a big comeback, and they had a nice win on the road against Iowa State. I'll have to go back and look and comb through the Twitter account. I didn't see anything about Cincinnati. And maybe that's just a dismissal of Baylor. And maybe the Big 12 has said that Baylor stinks and Oklahoma State stinks. And so they can't take those wins seriously. But those look like style points to me. Coming into Saturday's game, the Bearcats were favored by 3.5 points. Winning by 21 seems significant. No? Yeah? I don't know what the Bearcats need to do to gain the kind of respect that they deserve. And I think that, like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago when I was talking about, the odds of the Big 12 winner and all this other stuff, it kind of feels like the only thing they can do at this point is to just go do the thing. They just got to go win the conference, and then they will get the respect they deserve, because until they do that, I think people are going to count them short. And that is perfect for Scott Satterfield and for Brendan Sorsby and crew. They can put that chip on their shoulder and they can carry it all the way with them to Dallas because they've used it really well to this point. Nobody is giving them the credit they deserve. At the beginning of the season, nobody could believe that they could even get to this spot. And so the chips are just stacking up on their shoulders. It's the kind of bulletin board material that a coach dreams of. Nobody believes in you. Okay, now we're winning, coach. What next? Nobody's taking that seriously. Great. Guess what, Utah? You got a big old chip on their shoulders coming in to see you, and they've had themselves one heck of a season in the Bearcats, and they're going to want blood. I just I don't think they're ready. I don't think Utah's ready. I don't think Arizona's ready. I don't think BYU is ready. BYU is going to play Texas Tech the week before they play Cincinnati. Ooh, there are a lot of storylines that are setting up for the Bearcats, and they're the best team in the Big 12. They're going to win that conference championship. Make sure you follow me along with this ride here because we're going to be talking all about it all week long. Chad Brendle's going to join us on Tuesday, and we're going to, take a look back on this one just for another moment and then look forward to what's going to happen out in Utah. And of course, later on in the week, we'll have Russ Heltman. Going to see if I can get a few more folks on here this week. I know I had Dan Hort on a couple of weeks ago. Would like to talk to him a little bit more about how he's feeling about this team. But there's so much to get to with this football team, and we're going to be with you every step of the way. So make sure you hit subscribe so that you don't miss anything that we've got coming for you here on Locked On Bearcats. We are your Bearcats every single day, and thank you for checking us out here. Now go check out Locked On Big 12. Go see what Drake Toll's saying. I'm sure it's 30 minutes of BYU and 5 seconds of Cincinnati. Probably is. I don't know. Maybe he just hates Skyline. Who knows? But I'd be interested to see what he's got to say about it all. Make sure that you hit subscribe, though, because we're going to be talking Bearcats here on Locked On Bearcats every single day.